Dear brothers and sisters, today is called the Sunday of the Steward because we read the parable of the shrewd steward that comes to us from the Gospel of St. Luke. Last week we read the parable of the prodigal son, and we said the core message of that parable is that God forgives us whenever we sin and whenever we choose to come back to God. But once we are forgiven, there are certain expectations. God expects us to live in a certain way so that the grace that He has given to us will grow and we will become mature Christians. Today's parable is a little bit unorthodox parable, but we will try to explain it to us so that we can understand what is the true message of this parable. Jesus speaks today about two parables, by the way. It's not only one parable. The most known parable is the parable of the steward. We read in the gospel, Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each of the master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The master told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly," and made it 400. Then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kinds than are the people of light. What is astonishing here is that after handling the business in a certain way, the master is commending the shrewdness of the steward. This is a very difficult parable for us to understand. And I've done some studies, I've done some research to understand what it is that Jesus is trying to convince or to convey us through this parable. And it turns out that the manager was giving away his commission, his part, because originally he was given so much power and he had charged whatever he wanted to charge. But now when he was faced with a difficult time, he was willing to give away his part and make friends so that he will be welcomed whenever he loses his job. There are a few things that we can learn from this parable. The first thing that we can learn is his problem-solving skills. When he was faced with difficulty, when he knew that he is about to lose his job, when he heard it from his master that, "I'm going to let you go," he didn't go out. He didn't start to complain to his coworkers. "Do you see what my manager is doing? After all these years that I've worked with him, is this the kind of reward that I deserve?" He did not complain. It's something that, a lot of us do very easily. We embrace the role of this miserable person, and we complain and we try to evoke the empathy of the people around us. But not this guy. Instead of complaining, he started to look into his options, and he decided that making a deal with the people who owed his master would be the best way to solve his problem. The second thing that is very important in this parable is that the fact that this manager was able to detach himself from the money or the profit that he was about to make. He was able to let go. Detachment is a very important quality of life. Yes, I call it the quality of life. We live a life of attachments. There are healthy attachments. As children, when we are born, we are attached to our parents. We are attached to our caregivers. And I always say, when we are born, our umbilical cord is cut right away, but that emotional and the psychological umbilical cord takes a lot of time to be cut. And there are other attachments. We are attached to the things that we have. We are attached to our houses, to our possessions. That's not such a healthy attachment. And the worst attachment is the attachment that we have, the unhealthy attachments that we have to people around us. And I know you can identify one or two people who can make you very, very angry. The minute that you start thinking about that person, your blood starts to boil. You cannot imagine yourself sitting down and talking with them. The resentment that you have is way too much. Well, that turns out to be an unhealthy attachment. If we detach, we start to see things clearly, and we start solving our problems. I said today we have two parables. This is the first parable. And the second parable is at the end of our reading. It is the parable of the rich man and poor Lazarus. There was a rich man who enjoyed his life, and there was a homeless person who was sitting in front of his house every day. And he was so poor that he would feed himself from the garbage of this rich man's house. He had sores on his body. Dogs would come to lick the sores. And one day he died. And the text tells us he went to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died, and he was buried, the text says. In hell, now this is the next scene, where the rich man was burning, he saw his homeless neighbor. And guess what? He recognized him. And he said to Father Abraham, send him over. Let him bring some water to me. You see the sense of entitlement. But Father Abraham spoke and he said, no, he can't. There's a big gap between us. Then he realized about the situation that he was in. And he said, well, send him back. Send him back so that he can go and speak to my brothers, so that they also can change their lives. And they might not end up the way that I ended up here. And Abraham tells him, well, they have the law, they have the prophets, they have everything that they need. But the rich man says, well, if somebody from the dead goes back and speaks to them, they will change their minds. And Abraham disagrees. Not even a man who comes back from the dead will make them change their minds. Now, this last part has with the resurrection of Jesus. We're not going to speak about that. But we're going to contrast the shrewd manager and the rich man. The shrewd manager was able to detach himself from his wealth, from his potential income. In this case, the rich man was self-absorbed. He never saw that poor man. He never helped him. The money that he had, the resources that he had, didn't help him to make friends with people around him. I guess one of the most important lessons of our reading today is that we all have resources. And what we do with those resources is very important. We can use those resources only for us to make ourselves happy, to feed into our selfish lifestyle. Or we can use parts of those resources to also reach out and make a difference in the life of the people around us. I'm looking at you, and I know I have a sense that I'm preaching to the choir, because most of you, I know, you give from your resources. Some of you give from your time. Others give from their material resources. You help people around you. And that is a good thing. But the most important thing that we need to learn from this Sunday today, this is not about how we handle money, by the way. It's about the fact that there will be a time that God will ask you to give an account of our life. Just like the landlord asked the manager to give an account of how he was handling his business. And the manager acted promptly. In our life of faith, that promptness is very important. Because we tend to delay things. We tend to think that, oh, I have time. Why should I pray tonight? I feel so tired. Let me just go to sleep. I still have time. Why should I go to Mass this Sunday? I can skip this Sunday. Once I retire, I will go to church every Sunday. One day I will read that Bible cover to cover, but not yet. I'm not ready yet. We tend to postpone things. What God wants us is that the time that we have is a grace. We call that a grace period, right? I used to value those grace periods, by the way, when I was a student. It turns out that in our Christian life, every day that we live is a grace period. And we need to make the best out of that. To as vazorten se spolorot aijam, je mišt je havidianes, havidenic. Amen.